Ali Khamenei. That name has been tied to the power of the Islamic Republic of Iran for more than 3 decades, and in the modern political history of the Middle East, he is regarded as one of the most profoundly influential leaders. Born in the city of Mashhad, he rose from a modest clerical family to become the holder of Iran's highest position of power. In his role as supreme leader, Ali Khamenei is not only a religious leader but also the decisive voice in every major national issue, from politics and military matters to foreign strategy. Over more than 30 years of leadership, he has witnessed Iran pass through pivotal moments, from the years of reconstruction after the Iran-Iraq War to the globally watched nuclear negotiations, and the profound shifts in the Middle East balance of power. Under his tenure, Iran has gradually asserted itself as a regional powerhouse with influence extending from Iraq and Syria to Lebanon. For his supporters, Khamenei is the guardian of the legacy of the Iranian Revolution of 1979 and a symbol of steadfastness in the face of international pressure. The image of the cleric with the black turban and calm, deep voice has become a familiar icon in Iran's political life. A leader many believe has kept the country steady through the era's many upheavals. Yet behind that journey of power lies a life shaped by dramatic events and deep pain. Before becoming the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei was a young cleric secretly active against the Shah's monarchy, and for that he was repeatedly arrested and interrogated by the SAVAK secret police. Those years in prison tested his faith and will, but also left unforgettable memories of a turbulent period in Iran's history. The biggest turning point in his life came in 1981, when a bomb hidden in a tape recorder exploded while he was giving a speech. The blast left him severely injured, and his right arm permanently paralyzed, a wound he has carried for the rest of his life. That was the moment many thought his life might end, but instead it became the pivot that shaped his political path. From someone who nearly died in an assassination attempt, Ali Khamenei then entered years of leading the country amid war, crises, and international confrontations. The road from a boy raised in a poor clerical family in Mashhad to the most powerful man in Iran is not just a story of power, but one of challenges, losses, and perseverance against adversity. And it is from both those achievements and those pains that Ali Khamenei has become one of the most deeply influential figures in modern Iran. Before we continue exploring the turbulent journey that turned Ali Khamenei from a poor boy in Mashhad into the most powerful man in Iran, please remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next captivating history stories. Ali Hosseini Khamenei was born on April 19, 1939, in the city of Mashhad in northeastern Iran. Mashhad is one of the most important religious centers in the Shia Muslim world because it is home to the shrine of Imam Reza, the 8th Imam in the Shia tradition. In the 20th century, this city was not only a pilgrimage site for millions of devotees, but also a hub for many theological schools and clerical families. It was in that religious environment that Ali Khamenei grew up and was deeply influenced by Iran's traditional religious values. The Khamenei family belonged to the Shia clerical class. His father, Sayyid Javad Khamenei, was a cleric with theological education, who had studied at major religious centers such as Najaf in Iraq. He was a strict, disciplined man who devoted most of his life to teaching religion and studying the Quran. Though respected in the community, Sayyid Javad was not wealthy. A local cleric's income at that time was quite limited, and the family lived in fairly modest conditions. Ali Khamenei grew up in a large family where everyone had to share living space and scarce resources. Family meals were usually simple, and daily life followed a rhythm closely tied to religious activities. His mother, Khadija Damadi, also came from a family with a religious tradition. She was known as a kind but strong-willed woman who played a key role in caring for the family. While Khamenei's father represented discipline and strictness, his mother was the source of emotional support for the children. Relatives later recounted that she was the one who encouraged her children to be patient in their studies and to hold firm to their religious faith in all circumstances. Ali Khamenei had many siblings, and life in a large family taught its members to share from a very early age. Material limitations were not uncommon for clerical families of that era, but what mattered more to them was maintaining the religious life and education. From a young age, Khamenei was taken to local religious classes to study the Quran, Arabic, and basic Islamic jurisprudence. This was the traditional path of learning for sons of clerical families. In that environment, religious education was not just an option but almost a duty. Ali Khamenei began studying at religious schools in Mashhad from childhood. The curriculum included the Quran, Sharia law, Arabic grammar, and classical religious texts. Those early years laid the foundation for the theological path he would follow for many years to come. Alongside religious education, traditional Persian culture also played an important role in Khamenei's development. Persian literature, especially the works of famous poets like Hafez, Sa'di, and Ferdowsi, was often read and discussed in intellectual and religious families in Iran. These works contain many themes about ethics, justice, and human responsibility toward society. Khamenei later mentioned his love for Persian poetry many times and considered it an important part of shaping his thought. The 1940s and 1950s were a period when Iran went through many political and social upheavals. While the central government tried to modernize the country along Western lines, many clerics and the religious class worried that Iran's traditional values were under threat. That political atmosphere directly affected religious centers like Mashhad. In many religious and academic discussions, clerics often spoke about the role of Islam in protecting the country's identity and independence. Such conversations were not always explicitly political, but they helped shape how many religiously minded young people viewed society. Ali Khamenei grew up in an environment where religion, culture, and a sense of social justice were closely intertwined. The first lessons he received were not about power or politics, but about faith, discipline, and perseverance. His family believed that a person's strength lay not in wealth or social status, but in faith and endurance through hardship. Those values were repeated throughout his upbringing from childhood. For many who later studied Ali Khamenei's life, those years in Mashhad hold special significance. They not only provided him with a religious foundation, but also shaped how he viewed the world. In a poor but educated and disciplined clerical family, he learned that advancement came not from wealth, but from knowledge and faith. From early on, Ali Khamenei was taught that life's challenges could be overcome through patience and steadfastness to the values one believes in. Those lessons stayed with him throughout his life, from his years of study at theological schools to when he entered Iran's political arena many decades later. After those early years in Mashhad, the path that Ali Khamenei chose was almost shaped from the very beginning. In traditional Shia clerical families, pursuing theology was not just a profession but a spiritual duty. So, after completing the basic religious classes in Mashhad, Khamenei went deeper into Iran's theological education system. He studied at local religious schools, where young clerics were trained in the Quran, Sharia law, Islamic philosophy, and classical Arabic. Those initial years of study helped him build the academic foundation needed to become a cleric. But for Khamenei, learning didn't stop at doctrine. He began to pay more attention to big questions about society, politics, and the role of religion in a nation that was changing rapidly. Mashhad at that time was not just a pilgrimage city, but also an academic center of Shia Islam. Many influential clerics taught at the theological schools there, and religious discussions were often linked to the political issues of Iran back then. In the 1950s, the country was going through a lot of upheaval. The central government under Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi was pushing modernization programs modeled on the West, while a portion of the clerical class worried that Iran's traditional values were being weakened. Debates about national identity, political independence, and the role of religion in the state became increasingly common in theological schools. For a young theology student like Ali Khamenei, these discussions had a profound impact. He didn't just study classical religious texts, but also began reading a lot of historical and political works. Khamenei was particularly interested in ideas about the independence of Muslim nations from Western powers' influence. In many later writings and speeches, he often recalled that those early years of study helped him better understand the relationship between religion, society, and political power. After some time studying in Mashhad, Khamenei decided to continue his education in Qom, the most important theological center in Iran. Qom had long been seen as the intellectual heart of Shia Islam. There, young clerics from all over Iran and many other Shia countries gathered to study under the guidance of renowned religious scholars. For Khamenei, going to Qom was not just an academic step forward, but also an opportunity to encounter new ideas emerging among the clerical community. It was in Qom that he met a figure who would profoundly influence his life, Ayatollah Khomeini. At that time, Khomeini had begun to gain fame in religious circles with his powerful lectures on Islam and politics. He believed that religion should not be separated from social life and the state. According to Khomeini, clerics not only have the responsibility to guide believers spiritually, but also had to engage in political guidance and protect the Islamic identity of the nation. Khomeini's lectures attracted the attention of many theology students, including Ali Khamenei. For Khamenei, Khomeini's ideas offered a new perspective on the role of religion in modern society. He began attending the classes and discussions organized by Khomeini, gradually becoming one of the students most strongly influenced by this cleric's thought. The relationship between teacher and student was not just academic, but also ideological. Khamenei didn't just learn theological aspects from Khomeini, but also absorbed his views on the necessity of a political system based on Islamic principles. During this period, Khamenei's thinking began to take clearer shape. One key element in his thought was skepticism toward Western influence in Iran. Many clerics in Qom believed that the Shah's modernization programs had brought too many Western cultural and political elements into Iranian society, weakening the country's traditional values. Khamenei gradually shared this view. He began to see Iran's independence not just as a political issue, but also as a cultural and religious one. In addition, he increasingly believed that religion could not stand outside society's problems. For Khamenei, Islam was not just a personal belief system, but the foundation for a just social order. This view aligned with Khomeini's thinking, who argued that clerics had to play a leadership role in defending justice and opposing what they saw as political oppression or foreign influence. During his years in Qom, Khamenei didn't just study theology but also actively participated in political discussions among students and young clerics. He began to be known as someone with good speaking skills and broad knowledge of Iran's history and culture. Beyond religious texts, he read a lot of Persian literature and history books, which helped him develop a broader view of society and politics. Although at this point he was still a young cleric with little influence, the years in Mashhad and Qom laid the groundwork for the path he would later take. There, Ali Khamenei not only became a religious scholar, but also began to form his role as an observer and analyst of Iran's political developments. His relationship with Ayatollah Khomeini, the debates about national independence, and the role of religion in politics created the ideological foundation for him. These ideas would stay with Khamenei in the years to come, when he stepped out of the theological schools and began directly participating in the political movements that were gradually changing Iran's destiny. When Ali Khamenei left the relatively closed academic environment of the theological schools to step deeper into Iranian social life, he also entered a highly turbulent historical period for the country. In the 1960s and 1970s, Iran, under the rule of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, was undergoing extensive modernization. The Shah's government promoted economic and social reforms aimed at turning Iran into a modern nation modeled on the West. Cities grew rapidly, infrastructure was built, and the oil industry brought huge revenues to the state. However, along with those changes came growing tensions in society. Many Iranians, especially the religious community and parts of the traditional middle class, worried that the rapid pace of modernization was eroding the country's cultural and religious values. In addition, the Shah's regime was criticized for its tight political controls. The SAVAK secret police, established with support from Western intelligence agencies, was tasked with monitoring and suppressing dissenting voices. Political activists, intellectuals, and clerics were frequently arrested, interrogated, or forced into silence. In that context, many religious centers like Mashhad and Qom became places where discussions grew increasingly political. For Ali Khamenei, this period marked the transition from a young cleric focused purely on academics to someone more actively involved in political life. After completing many years of study in Qom, he returned to Mashhad and began teaching at religious schools. His lectures initially focused on theological topics and Islamic ethics, but gradually they also addressed the emerging social issues in Iran. Khamenei did not speak of religion merely as a personal belief system, but emphasized Islam's role in protecting justice and national identity. In his teaching sessions and discussions, he often referred to the ideas he had absorbed from Ayatollah Khomeini and other reform-minded clerics. One recurring theme in his speeches was the necessity of national independence from the influence of outside powers. Many clerics believed Iran was becoming overly dependent on Western countries, especially the United States, and that this could undermine the nation's sovereignty. Such views began to attract the attention of religious students and youth who were seeking a different vision for Iran's future. In addition to teaching, Khamenei also started participating in organizing activities within the religious community. Groups of students and young clerics often met to discuss the political situation and share materials related to Ayatollah Khomeini's thought. Many such meetings took place discreetly because the Shah's regime viewed these activities as potential threats to the political order. Khamenei became one of the active participants in these discussion networks. He helped organize study sessions, distribute Khomeini's lectures and materials, and connect student and young cleric groups across different cities. During these years, the anti-government movement gradually expanded beyond religious centers. University students, intellectuals, and various other political groups also began voicing opposition to the regime. Although the opposition groups held diverse views, they shared some common concerns: demands for political reform, limits on the secret police's power, and a greater role for traditional cultural values in Iranian society. Clerics like Khamenei played an important role in linking religious ideas to broader political demands. Khamenei's activities during this period made him increasingly known within opposition networks. He was not the most prominent figure in the movement, but many saw him as a capable young cleric with strong organizational skills and good speaking ability. His lectures often blended religious doctrine with analyses of social conditions, which drew interest from many students and young people. For those involved in the movement, these discussions were not just religious activities, but a way to share ideas about the country's future. However, the growth of opposition networks also drew greater attention from the regime to young clerics like Khamenei. SAVAK closely monitored religious and political activities, and many meetings were surveilled. Some clerics and students were arrested for participating in what were deemed anti-government activities. In such an environment, organizing discussions and spreading Khomeini's lectures became increasingly difficult and risky. Nevertheless, Khamenei continued his work. For him and many other clerics, spreading ideas about national independence and religion's role in politics was not just a personal choice but a moral duty. They believed religion had to play a part in defending justice and opposing what they saw as oppression or injustice. It was in this context that Ali Khamenei gradually became one of the most active young clerics in the emerging opposition movement in Iran. The late 1960s and early 1970s thus became a crucial preparatory phase for the major upheavals that followed. Networks of clerics, students, and political activists became more tightly connected. Lectures, discussions, and hand-circulated materials spread from one city to another, creating a new intellectual space in Iranian society. For Ali Khamenei, this was the time he moved away from the role of a purely academic cleric to become a direct participant in the political changes gradually taking shape in the country. The seeds of the revolution, though not yet exploded, began to be sown during those very years. As religious and political opposition networks spread in the late 1960s, the regime of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi began to react more forcefully. The state viewed clerics and activists linked to Ayatollah Khomeini's thought as threats to the regime's stability. To control the situation, the government relied on one of its most powerful agencies, the SAVAK secret police. This security organization was established in 1957 with the mission of monitoring and suppressing those suspected of opposing the state. SAVAK had the authority to surveil, arrest, and interrogate political activists, and in many cases prisoners were held in harsh conditions or tortured to force silence. By this time, Ali Khamenei had become one of the young clerics actively spreading Khomeini's ideas. His lectures in Mashhad and other cities often emphasized religion's role in protecting justice and national independence. The regime monitored these activities more and more closely. In 1963, amid widespread protests against the Shah following Khomeini's famous speech in Qom, Khamenei was arrested for the first time. At that moment, he was carrying out an assigned task, delivering a secret letter from Khomeini to clerics in Mashhad to warn them about the regime's repressive actions. Spreading such messages made him a target of the security forces. The first arrest did not last long, but it marked a turning point in Khamenei's life. He realized from that point onward he would always be on SAVAK's watch list. In the years that followed, as anti-government activities intensified, Khamenei was arrested multiple more times. According to historical records, he was arrested a total of about 6 times throughout the 1960s and 1970s for his involvement in anti-monarchy activities. The prisons where he was held became an important part of his life story. One of the most notorious was the prison run by the Joint Anti-Sabotage Committee in Tehran, a facility managed by SAVAK. Many political prisoners from that era later recounted that interrogations often lasted for hours and were accompanied by forms of psychological pressure. Khamenei also went through such interrogations. During one detention in the early 1970s, he was placed in a very small solitary confinement cell where light barely entered and time seemed to pass very slowly. These experiences, as he later said, made him realize the seriousness of the confrontation between revolutionary clerics and the Shah's regime. Even so, time in prison did not cause him to abandon his political activities. On the contrary, it became a place where he met many other activists. In the cramped cells, conversations among prisoners often revolved around Iran's future and the role of religion in society. Some came from secular political groups, while others were clerics or religious students. These exchanges created an environment where ideas were debated and developed, even under conditions of detention. A person who once shared a cell with Khamenei later recounted that he often spent a lot of time reading the Quran or reflecting in silence. But when discussing with other prisoners, he showed himself to be someone with sharp reasoning and deep knowledge of Iran's history and culture. Conversations like that helped reinforce his belief that the anti-regime movement was not just a political dispute, but a struggle over the country's identity and independence. Those years of imprisonment also left deep personal marks. In the prison environment where inmates faced constant isolation and pressure, religious faith became an important source of spiritual strength for many. For Khamenei, reading the Quran and reflecting on Islamic teachings helped him maintain calm and steadfastness. According to accounts from those who met him in prison, he often encouraged other prisoners to stay strong in spirit and to believe that the current hardships were just part of a larger struggle. In total, during the period before the Iranian Revolution, Khamenei spent about 3 years in the Shah's prisons. Beyond the detentions, he was also forced into internal exile for a time in remote regions of the country. These measures were designed to prevent him from continuing his political activities, but in reality they made him even more determined in the goals he and his allies pursued. Looking back later, many observers say this period transformed Ali Khamenei from a young cleric interested in academics into a genuine revolutionary activist. His experiences in SAVAK prisons not only tested his faith but also strengthened his political will. From someone who mainly taught and discussed ideas, he gradually became a figure ready to confront the regime directly. As the 1970s drew toward the end of the decade, discontent in Iranian society grew steadily. Protests, strikes, and anti-government political activities appeared in many cities. Clerics who had been imprisoned like Khamenei were no longer marginal figures. They became part of a broad opposition network preparing for the major upheavals about to come. And for Ali Khamenei, those years in the Shah's prisons marked an important change. From a young cleric still finding his role, he had become a fully committed revolutionary in the struggle he believed would shape Iran's future. The years in the Shah's prisons did not weaken the opposition movement. On the contrary, as the late 1970s arrived, Iran began entering a period of unprecedented major instability in its modern history. Anti-government protests appeared more and more frequently in many cities. Strikes spread widely in factories, universities, and even the oil industry, the most important revenue source for the economy. Discontent had been building in Iranian society for many years, and now it began to erupt into a broad movement that the regime found increasingly hard to control. For Ali Khamenei, this was the moment when his years of covert activity and previous arrests started converging into a historic turning point. He continued participating in religious and political networks, supporting Ayatollah Khomeini the cleric, living in exile, but increasingly becoming the symbol of the anti-Shah movement. In many cities across Iran, Khomeini's lectures, materials and messages were secretly passed hand to hand among students, clerics and activists. Khamenei was one of the active participants in spreading these ideas while organizing discussion sessions and meetings among supporting groups. The situation became especially tense in 1978. Large protests broke out in Tehran, Qom, Mashhad, and many other cities. At first, the demonstrations were mainly organized by students and religious groups, but gradually they drew participation from many other social classes, including workers, merchants, and intellectuals. The regime tried to suppress the protests with harsh measures, but those repressive actions only spread the anger wider. Strikes paralyzed many economic sectors and left the government increasingly unable to control the situation. In that context, clerics like Ali Khamenei played an important role in connecting religious networks to the broader protest movement. Religious lectures, which had previously focused only on doctrine, now often tied in with social and political themes. Many clerics emphasized that religion could not be separated from the country's issues. Such messages attracted large audiences, especially as Iranian society was searching for a new direction. By the end of 1978, the anti-government movement had developed into a nationwide uprising. Millions took to the streets in major cities demanding an end to the monarchy. The protests lasted for weeks and sometimes led to clashes with security forces. In many areas, symbols of the Shah's regime were torn down and pro-Khamenei slogans appeared across the streets. These events marked the climax of the revolution forming in Iran. Under mounting pressure, the Shah's regime began to weaken rapidly. Many government officials realized the situation had spiraled beyond control. Finally, on January 16, 1979, Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi left Iran. News of his departure quickly spread across the country and was seen by many as a sign that the monarchy was collapsing. Millions poured into the streets to celebrate, and in many cities, symbols of the old regime were dismantled. But the revolution was not yet fully over. Just 2 weeks later, a historic event took place. On February 1, 1979, Ayatollah Khomeini returned to Iran after more than 14 years in exile. His plane landed at Tehran airport to the welcome of millions of supporters. The crowd was so large that the motorcade carrying him from the airport to the city center had to stop many times. Khamenei's return quickly made him the undisputed leader of the revolution. In just a few days after that, forces loyal to the monarchy began to disintegrate. By February 11, 1979, the Pahlavi regime officially collapsed. Iran entered a completely new phase in its history. In the months that followed, a referendum was held to decide the country's future. The results showed that the majority of voters supported establishing a new state based on the principles of Shia Islam. That state was called the Islamic Republic of Iran. For Ali Khamenei, the 1979 revolution marked the biggest turning point in his life up to that point. After many years of covert activity, arrests, and surveillance by the Shah's security forces, he now became one of the familiar faces in the revolutionary movement. He participated in political and religious activities during the country's transitional period, while continuing to work with other clerics and activists to consolidate the new political system that was taking shape. Khamenei's rise during this phase was not the result of a single event, but the outcome of many years of involvement in the opposition movement. His lectures, secret organizing efforts, and months in SAVAK prisons had helped him build relationships and credibility within the revolutionary network. When the old regime collapsed, those who had once been suppressed now became the forces shaping Iran's future. The 1979 revolution did not just change Iran's political system, it also changed Ali Khamenei's life. From a young cleric operating in the shadows, he now entered a new phase one of power, responsibility, and far greater challenges. And in the newly established state, his political path was only just beginning. But just 2 years after the revolution's success, Iran entered another period full of instability and danger. In 1981, the country was still in the process of building its new political system after the monarchy's fall. Political groups that had once joined the revolution now began clashing over power and the nation's direction. Some armed organizations and opposition groups carried out attacks targeting revolutionary government leaders. Assassinations and bombings occurred more and more frequently, making Iran's political atmosphere tense and full of risk. In that context, Ali Khamenei, who by then had become one of the familiar faces of the revolutionary movement, frequently appeared in public at religious lectures and speeches. On June 27, 1981, an event occurred that completely changed his life. That day, Khamenei went to Abu Zar Mosque in southern Tehran to deliver a routine religious speech. He had just returned from the Iran-Iraq war front lines, and per his weekly schedule, he was to speak to the faithful after prayers. In the small room of the mosque, many people had gathered to listen. On the table in front of him sat a tape recorder, a device supposedly there to record the speech. No one present at the time knew that a bomb had been planted inside that tape recorder. As Khamenei began answering questions from the attendees, the tape recorder suddenly made a strange sound. Just seconds later, a huge explosion rang out. The blast happened right in front of him, shaking the entire room. People panicked. Smoke and debris flew everywhere. Khamenei was thrown to the floor, his body severely injured by the force of the explosion. Those present immediately rushed into the hospital in critical condition. Doctors later confirmed that the explosion caused serious damage. His right arm was heavily destroyed, and his vocal cords and lungs were also injured. For many months afterward, he underwent long and difficult treatment. In the end, he survived. But the injury left permanent consequences. Ali Khamenei's right arm was completely paralyzed and never recovered. For many Iranians at the time, his survival after the explosion was seen as something almost miraculous. Some recounted that in the first hours after the attack, his condition was so severe that doctors were not sure he would pull through. Khamenei himself later admitted that his heart stopped beating for a brief moment after the blast, but somehow he lived, and that survival quickly became an iconic story in Iran's political context. At that time, the country was experiencing a wave of political violence. Just one day after the attack on Khamenei, a major bombing occurred at the headquarters of the Islamic Republic Party in Tehran, killing more than 70 high-ranking officials. These events led many in the government to believe the revolution was still threatened from multiple sides. In that context, Khamenei's survival after the assassination attempt carried meaning far beyond a personal story. For revolution supporters, he became a symbol of resilience in the face of political violence. The image of the cleric with a paralyzed arm, yet still appearing in public to speak and engage in politics, was seen by many as proof of the revolution's spirit. The wound he carried for the rest of his life became a visible mark of a turbulent era in Iran's history. Khamenei himself continued his political activities right after recovering. Though speaking and moving became more difficult due to the damage to his lungs and vocal cords, he still participated in meetings and activities of the revolutionary government. Those who worked with him during that time said the assassination attempt did not make him withdraw from the political scene. On the contrary, it seemed to make him even more determined in his role within the new system being built. Looking back later, many observers say the 1981 explosion was one of the most important turning points in Ali Khamenei's life. Before that, he had been a known cleric and revolutionary activist, but after the event, his image became tied to surviving political violence and loyalty to the revolution. The story of the bomb hidden in the tape recorder at Abu Zar Mosque quickly became part of Iran's political history. From that moment on, Ali Khamenei was no longer just a cleric or a politician. In the eyes of many revolution supporters, he became a symbol of perseverance and faith in a dangerous era. and it was from an incident that could have ended his life that the path leading him to higher positions of power in the Iranian state began to open. After the failed assassination attempt in 1981, Ali Khamenei was still in the process of recovering when Iran continued to plunge deeper into one of the harshest periods in its modern history. But paradoxically, it was precisely in that time of great instability that his political career entered a completely new chapter. Just a few months after the explosion at Abu Zar Mosque, Iran faced a serious leadership crisis. President Mohammad Ali Rajai was assassinated in a bombing in August 1981, suddenly leaving the top government position vacant. In the context of the revolutionary government needing to quickly stabilize its leadership structure, Ali Khamenei, who had just survived an assassination attempt and was seen as a figure loyal to Ayatollah Khomeini, was nominated to run for president. In October 1981, in the presidential election, Khamenei won a landslide victory with about 97% of the vote, becoming the third president of the Islamic Republic of Iran and also the first cleric to hold the position. This event marked a major shift in his life. From a revolutionary activist and religious cleric, he now became the head of government of a nation facing war and crises from every direction. However, the real power in Iran's political system at that time still rested with Ayatollah Khomeini, the supreme leader of the revolution. Khamenei, though holding the presidency, still operated under the shadow of his main political mentor, but that did not diminish the importance of the position he held. In the years that followed, he would have to run the government under extremely difficult circumstances. In reality, the war had begun before he became president. In September 1980, just over a year after the revolution, Iraq under Saddam Hussein's leadership suddenly attacked Iran. The conflict quickly escalated into a full-scale war between the two neighboring countries. The Iran-Iraq War lasted from 1980 to 1988 and became one of the longest and bloodiest conflicts of the 20th century. Millions of soldiers and civilians from both sides were killed or wounded in this 8-year-long war. When Khamenei entered his presidential term, the war had entered its most brutal phase. Iraqi forces initially advanced deep into Iranian territory, occupying many border areas. In the early years, the revolutionary government had to quickly reorganize its military forces while mobilizing hundreds of thousands of volunteers to defend the country. Units like the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps established after the revolution became one of the most important forces in the war. During his time as president, Khamenei developed a close relationship with this force and closely followed military matters, budgets, and war strategy. The prolonged war placed an enormous burden on Iran's economy. Infrastructure was destroyed, industrial production declined, and many cities near the border turned into battlefields. Millions of people had to leave their homes, while the national budget had to devote the majority to the war effort. The early 1980s thus became an extremely difficult period for Iranian society. Food, fuel, and many essential goods had to be distributed under a rationing system. The government had to both manage a wartime economy and maintain domestic political stability. For Khamenei, the role of president during this period was not a ceremonial position. He frequently attended strategic meetings, discussed with military commanders, and visited battlefields to boost troop morale. Images of him appearing at military bases or in meetings with government leaders became familiar on Iranian television. Despite his right arm being paralyzed after the assassination attempt, he continued to travel and work under difficult conditions, which made many supporters see him as a symbol of resilience in wartime. Within the government, Khamenei also faced many political challenges. The revolutionary administration at that time included various factions, from conservative clerics to revolutionary activists, with differing economic and political views. One key figure in the government during that period was Prime Minister Mehdi Hossein Mousavi, who was responsible for managing the economy under wartime conditions. Coordination between the president and the prime minister was not always smooth, but both had to face the same task, keeping the state functioning while the country was embroiled in a prolonged war. By 1985, Khamenei was re-elected president with a high vote count, continuing his second term. But the war was still not over. Major battles continued along the border between the two countries, and both Iran and Iraq suffered heavy losses. For many years, the front lines were virtually in a stalemate, with constant attacks and counterattacks but no side achieving a decisive victory. Throughout that time, Khamenei matured politically in an environment full of crises. He not only had to run the government under wartime conditions, but also had to learn how to balance the different power forces within Iran's new political system. These experiences later played an important role in his career. The Iran-Iraq War finally ended in 1988 after both sides accepted a UN-mediated ceasefire. But for Iran, 8 years of war left profound consequences. Hundreds of thousands dead, an exhausted economy, and a society shaped by the memory of war. For Ali Khamenei, the years as wartime president were a defining period in shaping his political persona. From a cleric once imprisoned under the Shah's regime, he now became a national leader who had to make life and death decisions for the country. The experiences in war, crisis, and managing a revolutionary state prepared him for a greater role in the future, one that even his supporters at the time could not fully imagine. The final years of the Iran-Iraq War left Iran's entire political system exhausted both economically and in human terms. When the ceasefire was accepted in 1988, the country entered a difficult transitional phase. Hundreds of thousands had died, many cities were devastated, and the economy would take years to recover. In that context, a big question began to emerge within Iran's leadership circles. What would the country's future look like when the founder of the Islamic Republic, Ayatollah Khomeini, had grown old and his health was steadily declining? Throughout the decade after the 1979 revolution, Khomeini had been the absolute center of power. He was not only the religious leader, but also the final decisive voice in every political matter of the nation. Therefore, the question of his successor became one of the most sensitive issues in Iran's political system. On June 3, 1989, Ayatollah Khomeini passed away in Tehran after a long illness. News of his death quickly spread across the country and triggered a powerful wave of emotion. Millions of Iranians took to the streets to attend the funeral, turning it into one of the largest funerals in modern history. But behind that atmosphere of mourning, Iran's leaders had to face a clear reality. The political system Khomeini had built now needed a new leader, and the question of succession immediately became an urgent matter. According to the Constitution of the Islamic Republic of Iran, the position of supreme leader is the most powerful office in the political system. The person holding this position has the authority to oversee the branches of government, command the armed forces, and make the country's major strategic decisions. But finding someone with sufficient religious and political credibility to succeed Khomeini was not an easy task. In the days right after his death, the Assembly of Experts, the body of clerics tasked with selecting the supreme leader, held emergency meetings to discuss the country's future. Within the assembly, various opinions were raised. Some clerics argue that Iran should be led by a collective council rather than a single individual. Others believed the country still needed one supreme leader to maintain political stability after years of war and crisis. In addition, the question of religious qualifications became a major issue. According to traditional understanding, the supreme leader needed to be a cleric with very high theological scholarship, often referred to as a marja, a religious rank that not every cleric achieves. In the list of potential successors to Khomeini, several high-ranking clerics were mentioned. However, many of them lacked political experience or were not seen as suitable to lead the country in the complex circumstances at the time. Iran had just ended an 8-year war and was entering a phase of reconstruction. The political system needed someone who understood the state apparatus well and could maintain stability. During the discussions, one name began to be mentioned more frequently: Ali Khamenei. At that time, he was serving as president of Iran and had nearly 8 years of experience leading the country during wartime. Khamenei was also one of Ayatollah Khomeini's closest students and was known for his loyalty to the principles of the revolution. However, choosing him as supreme leader initially still sparked a lot of debate. Some clerics argued that he had not reached the highest level of theological rank according to traditional standards. In a key meeting of the Assembly of Experts, the then Speaker of Parliament, Ali Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani, spoke and recalled a previous conversation with Ayatollah Khomeini. According to Rafsanjani, Khomeini had once said that Ali Khamenei could be the suitable person to lead the country in the future. This account had a significant influence on the Assembly's discussion. After many hours of debate, the members began to lean towards selecting Khamenei as supreme leader. Finally, the Assembly proceeded to a vote. The result showed that the majority of members agreed to choose Ali Khamenei as the new supreme leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran. This decision was announced in June 1989, just a few days after Khamenei's death. For many observers at the time, this was an unexpected choice. Khamenei was not the cleric with the highest religious rank, and he had not previously been seen as a top candidate for the position. But his political experience, his relationship with Khamenei, and his role in the Iran-Iraq war convinced many that he could maintain the stability of the political system. That decision completely changed Ali Khamenei's life. In just a few decades, he had gone through a remarkable journey from a young cleric studying at theological schools in Mashhad and Qom to becoming an activist against the Shah's regime, a political prisoner in SAVAK prisons, then a figure in the 1979 revolution. After that, he became the president of a country mired in war, and finally was chosen to hold the highest position of power in the Islamic Republic. At the time of his appointment, many people could not yet predict the role he would play in Iran's history. But from that day forward, Ali Khamenei was no longer just a politician or a cleric. He became the supreme leader, the holder of supreme authority in Iran's political system. And with that position, he also entered a new phase full of challenges, guiding a nation that had just gone through revolution and war into a period of reconstruction and facing a rapidly changing world. After being selected as supreme leader in June 1989, Ali Khamenei stepped into a position of power that previously only Ayatollah Khomeini had held. But unlike his predecessor, who had very high religious authority and was seen as the symbol of the revolution, Khamenei began his tenure in much more difficult circumstances. Some high-ranking clerics initially doubted his religious standing, and many observers thought he might only be a temporary leader. However, what happened in the years that followed proved the opposite. Instead of merely holding the position, Khomeini gradually built a solid power structure, turning the supreme leader role into the absolute center of Iran's political system. The Constitution of the Islamic Republic of Iran grants the supreme leader very broad powers. The holder of this position has the authority to determine the country's major policies, oversee all three branches of government, and serve as commander-in-chief of the armed forces. But in practice, the extent of the supreme leader's influence depends heavily on his ability to control other centers of power within the system. Ali Khamenei quickly understood that to consolidate his position, he needed to build his own pillars of power, organizations and networks that could protect and sustain his authority in the long term. One of the most important pillars of that system is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, established after the 1979 revolution to protect the new regime. This force quickly became one of Iran's strongest military and political organizations. In the years after taking power, Khamenei developed a close relationship with the IRGC, appointing loyal commanders and giving the force an increasingly large role in both military and economic affairs. Strengthening ties with the IRGC helped him build a power network capable of defending the regime against external threats as well as internal factions. Alongside that, Khamenei also consolidated power through the clerical system, the religious foundation of the Islamic Republic. After the revolution, clerics not only played a religious role but also became deeply involved in the state apparatus. Khamenei leveraged this network by appointing his representatives in many cities, government agencies, and religious organizations. These representatives acted as the supreme leader's eyes and ears, helping him monitor the political and social situation across the country. Over time, this system created a vast network of influence directly connected to the office of the supreme leader. Another pillar of power is the Guardian Council. This is a particularly influential body in Iran's political system. The council consists of 12 members, 6 of whom are clerics directly appointed by the supreme leader, and 6 jurists approved by parliament from a list nominated by the Chief Justice. The council's task is to review laws passed by parliament to ensure they comply with the constitution and Islamic law. But their power does not stop there. The Guardian Council also has the authority to oversee elections and decide who is allowed to run in presidential, parliamentary, and assembly of experts elections. This makes the body a crucial tool in shaping Iran's political system, because the supreme leader has significant influence over the composition of the Guardian Council. Khamenei can indirectly control many aspects of the political process. Over the years, the council has disqualified many candidates deemed incompatible with the system's line. This helps maintain a political environment where figures loyal to the religious system and to the supreme leader dominate positions of power. Beyond these three main pillars, Khamenei further strengthened his position by controlling many other key state institutions. The constitution grants the supreme leader the right to appoint critical positions such as the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, the head of the national radio and television broadcaster, and military commanders. This allows him to directly influence the judiciary, media, and security apparatus of the country. Over time, many important state positions were assigned to individuals seen as loyal to him, forming a tightly knit power network connected to the office of the supreme leader. In the 1990s and 2000s, this power structure became increasingly clear. Organizations like the IRGC expanded their role not only in the military but also in the economy and major development projects. Religious and political bodies continued to operate under the supreme leader's oversight. Meanwhile, Iran's presidents, regardless of their factional differences, still had to operate within the framework of the power system directed by the supreme leader. Many analysts argue that in the early years of his tenure, Khamenei had to work very hard to consolidate his position. But by the mid-1990s, he had succeeded in building a stable power structure around the supreme leader office. Key state institutions, from the military and clerical system to political oversight bodies, all had direct or indirect ties to his office. The result of this process is a unique power system. Iran still has a president, a parliament, and regular elections, but ultimate power remains concentrated in the position of supreme leader. The holder of this position is not only the religious leader, but also the final arbiter in political disputes, the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, and the one who sets the country's long-term strategic direction. For Ali Khamenei, building this power structure was a process that spanned many years. From someone initially questioned about his religious credentials when first appointed, he gradually became the center of Iran's political system. Step by step, through military, religious, and political networks, he turned the supreme leader position into the convergence point of national power. And as the 21st century arrived, there was little doubt left that Ali Khamenei had become the most influential figure in the Islamic Republic, the person standing at the pinnacle of a power system he himself had helped shape. After consolidating the internal power system in Iran, one of the biggest foreign policy issues Ali Khamenei had to face was the complex relationship between Iran and the United States. Since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, relations between the two countries have almost always been in a state of tension. Before the revolution, Iran under Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi was one of Washington's key allies in the Middle East. However, when the monarchy was overthrown and the Islamic Republic was established, relations between the two nations changed rapidly. The 1979 hostage crisis at the U.S. Embassy in Tehran led Washington to sever diplomatic ties with Iran. From that point onward, the two countries entered a long period of political and strategic confrontation. When Ali Khamenei became supreme leader in 1989, this tension had become a stable part of Iran's foreign policy. In many public speeches, he often emphasized that Iran needed to maintain political independence and avoid dependence on outside powers. This view reflected the core ideology of the Iranian Revolution, in which the concepts of independence and resistance to external interference were seen as the foundation of national policy. Meanwhile, the United States often viewed Iran as a country challenging Washington's influence in the Middle East and posing risks to regional security. One of the most contentious issues in relations between the two countries is Iran's nuclear program. Iran began developing its nuclear program during the Shah's era with Western support. After the 1979 revolution, the program was interrupted for a time, but was later resumed and expanded. the Iranian government has repeatedly stated that the goal of the nuclear program is to serve civilian needs, including electricity generation and scientific research. However, many Western countries, especially the United States, fear that the program could be used to develop nuclear weapons. Those concerns led to a series of international sanctions over many years. The United States and its allies imposed economic restrictions aimed at pressuring Iran to limit its nuclear activities. These measures included restrictions on oil exports, controls on financial transactions, and limits on access to the international banking system. These sanctions had a significant impact on Iran's economy, reducing oil revenue and creating many difficulties for the country's international trade. Over the years, diplomatic negotiations were held to resolve the disputes surrounding the nuclear program. One of the major turning points occurred in 2015, when Iran and the group of international powers signed an agreement known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA. Under this agreement, Iran agreed to limit the level of uranium enrichment and allow international agencies to monitor many nuclear facilities. In return, some economic sanctions were eased. The agreement was seen as a major effort to reduce tensions between Iran and the West. However, the agreement did not last long. In 2018, the United States announced its withdrawal from the JCPOA and reinstated economic sanctions against Iran. This decision caused tensions between the two countries to rise again. Iran subsequently began gradually reducing its commitments under the agreement and expanding some nuclear activities. New rounds of negotiations aimed at reviving the deal have been held multiple times, but so far no long-term results have been achieved. Beyond the nuclear program, the competition between Iran and the United States is also manifested in many regional issues. Iran maintains significant influence in several areas of the Middle East, including Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. Meanwhile, the United States has alliances with many other countries in the region, such as Israel and the Gulf states. These differences in interests and alliances often place the two nations on opposing sides in regional crises. Indirect confrontations between the two countries have sometimes escalated into major tense events. Attacks on energy facilities, naval confrontations, and military campaigns in the region have all contributed to increasing mutual suspicion. At many points, observers have worried that these tensions could lead to direct conflict, though both sides have generally tried to avoid a full-scale war. Throughout his many years as supreme leader, Ali Khamenei has played an important role in shaping how Iran responds to external pressures. He has often emphasized that Iran needs to maintain economic and military self-sufficiency to counter sanctions and international pressure. This viewpoint has significantly influenced Iran's long-term strategies in areas such as technology development, energy policy, and relations with other countries. Relations between Iran and the United States have thus become one of the most complex relationships in modern international politics. Rounds of negotiations, sanctions, periods of tension, and moments of de-escalation have continuously followed one another for decades. While Iranian and American presidents have changed over time, the basic structure of this relationship has largely been shaped by the historical, strategic, and political factors that formed after the 1979 revolution. And in Iran's political system, Ali Khamenei remains the single most influential figure in how the country shapes its strategy toward the United States. In addition to his role as the head of Iran's political system, Ali Khamenei's personal life has remained quite private and rarely disclosed to the public. Unlike many political leaders who frequently appear at social events or in the media, Khamenei has long maintained a simple lifestyle and remained relatively detached from public life. In his speeches, he rarely talks much about his private life. However, the known information shows that his personal life is closely tied to family, religion, and intellectual pursuits. Ali Khamenei married Mansour Khojasta Vagherzadeh in the 1960s, when he was still a young cleric active in religious networks in Mashhad and Qom. Mansour came from a traditional religious family and is known for leading a very private life, rarely appearing in public or participating in political activities. For many years, she has mainly focused on caring for the family and raising the children. Those who have met her describe her as a simple person who lives according to the traditional values of Iranian society. The Khamenei family has 6 children, 4 sons and 2 daughters. His children grew up in a special context, as their father increasingly became an important figure in Iran's political system. However, most of them have also maintained relatively private lives. Some of Khamenei's sons have followed the religious path like their father and engaged in academic activities in theological schools. Others have entered fields such as culture or education. The family rarely appears together at public events, reflecting the private tradition common among many clerical families in Iran. Despite holding the country's highest position of power for decades, Khamenei has often emphasized that he maintains a simple lifestyle. Many sources report that his residence in Tehran is not a large mansion, but a relatively modest compound attached to the Supreme Leader's office. People who have worked closely with him say he spends most of his time in political meetings, religious speeches, and reading. This lifestyle aligns with the image many Iranian clerics try to uphold, a life centered on study, religion, and social responsibility. Beyond his political activities, Ali Khamenei has long been known for his special love of literature. He has often mentioned his passion for classical Persian poetry, a key part of Iran's cultural tradition. The works of famous poets like Hafez, Saadi, and Ferdowsi have profoundly influenced generations of Iranians, and Khamenei is no exception. In many speeches, he sometimes quotes ancient verses to illustrate ideas about ethics, society, or history. Not only does he read poetry, but Khamenei is also known to be interested in philosophy and modern literary works. In his youth, he translated some Arabic texts into Persian and participated in academic discussions with theology students. His love of reading has continued throughout the later years. Some who have worked with him recount that his personal library contains many books on history, philosophy, religion, and literature. Alongside traditional Persian literature, he has also shown interest in the works of modern Iranian writers. Over the years, he has often met with poets and writers in cultural discussions held in Tehran. These meetings typically take place in small academic settings rather than political ones. For Khamenei, literature is not just a personal hobby, but a way to connect with an important part of Iran's cultural identity. Nevertheless, despite such intellectual interests, Khamenei's private life has remained significantly guarded. Details about his daily routines are rarely made public. Iranian media typically only report on his official activities such as speeches, meetings with government leaders, or religious events. Aspects of his personal life like daily habits, family relationships, or activities outside of politics are seldom mentioned in detail. This privacy reflects part of the tradition among many clerics in Iranian society, where private life is often separated from public activities. But it also reflects Khamenei's personal style. Throughout decades in power, he has mainly appeared in public in his role as a political and religious leader, while the personal aspects of his life remain behind closed doors. The known information thus only sketches a partial picture of the man behind the robes of the powerful cleric. He is a man devoted to his family, spending much time reading and reflecting, while maintaining a simple lifestyle despite holding great power. But behind that relatively private life remains a leader who must face the major political challenges of the country, challenges that will continue to shape his legacy in Iran's history. Throughout many decades holding the position of supreme leader, Ali Khamenei has not only been a central figure of Iran's political power, but also one of the most controversial leaders in the Middle East region. For his supporters, he is seen as the guardian of the principles of the Islamic Republic, and the one who has maintained the country's stability after decades of crisis. But for his critics, his policies and decisions have become the focus of many major controversies, especially during times of social unrest. These two opposing views have coexisted throughout his long tenure. One of the biggest political challenges to Iran's leadership system occurred in 2009. That year, the presidential election between Mahmoud Ahmadinejad and opposition candidates became the center of a major political crisis. When the official results were announced, showing Ahmadinejad winning by a landslide, many opposition supporters claimed the election had been rigged. Hundreds of thousands took to the streets in Tehran and many other cities to protest the results. The movement was quickly called the Green Movement. The 2009 protests became one of the most serious challenges to the Iranian government since the 1979 revolution. For many weeks, large marches took place on the streets, drawing international media attention. The protesters demanded a recount of the election results and called for political reform. The Iranian government viewed these demonstrations as a threat to the country's stability. Security forces and police were deployed to control the situation. Many clashes occurred between protesters and security forces, leading to numerous arrests and heightened political tension. Ali Khamenei played an important role in how the government responded to this crisis. In public speeches, he affirmed that the election results were legitimate and warned that the protests could weaken the country. For his supporters, this stance was seen as an effort to protect the stability of the political system after years of upheaval. However, for many critics, the government's response to the protest movement only heightened concerns about political freedom and freedom of expression in Iranian society. More than a decade later, Iran witnessed another wave of social unrest. In 2022, the death of Mahsa Amini, a young woman arrested for violating dress code regulations, sparked protests in many cities across the country. The initial demonstrations focused on issues related to women's rights, but they quickly expanded into larger protests against some government policies. Thousands participated in the demonstrations, and many slogans reflected dissatisfaction with the economic and social situation. The Iranian government responded by deploying security forces to control the protests. These events quickly became a widely discussed topic in international media. Some Western governments and human rights organizations criticized the Iranian government's handling of the situation. Meanwhile, Iranian leaders argued that the protests were influenced by external factors and emphasized that maintaining national stability was the top priority. Beyond domestic controversies, Iran's regional policy has also been a subject of much debate. Over many years, Iran has built significant influence in the Middle East through relationships with governments and organizations in several countries. Iran played a role in developments in Iraq after 2003, supported the Syrian government during its civil war, and maintained ties with forces in Lebanon and Yemen. These policies have been described by Tehran as part of a strategy to protect national security and enhance regional influence. However, Iran's rivals in the region and many Western countries view these activities differently. They argue that Iran's support for armed groups and expansion of military influence could increase tensions in the Middle East. Therefore, Iran's regional policies often become one of the contentious points in international relations. In all these matters, Ali Khamenei remains the central figure in Iran's leadership system. In his role as supreme leader, he has great influence over the country's strategic decisions. In his speeches, he often emphasizes that Iran needs to maintain political independence and protect the principles of the 1979 revolution. This viewpoint is seen by many supporters as a continuation of Ayatollah Khomeini's legacy. However, alongside that support also exist many critical opinions. Some observers argue that Iran's political system needs more reforms to meet changes in society. These debates reflect the diversity of views among the Iranian people about the country's future. Thus, the image of Ali Khamenei in modern Iranian history is often viewed in two different ways. For his supporters, he is the defender of the revolution and the leader who has kept the country stable in a turbulent region. But for his critics, he is the symbol of a political system they believe needs change. These two opposing images continue to coexist, creating a complex legacy for one of Iran's most enduringly influential leaders. After the domestic controversies and successive political crises, another aspect of Iran's power under Ali Khamenei has become increasingly clear: Tehran's increasingly extensive influence across the Middle East region. For many decades, Iran has not only focused on internal issues, but has also developed a regional strategy to expand its political and military influence. Through alliances, allied organizations, and military networks, Iran has gradually become one of the most important geopolitical actors in the Middle East. One of the most important battlegrounds for Iran's influence is Syria. When the Syrian civil war broke out in 2011, President Bashar al-Assad's government quickly faced the risk of collapse. Iran regarded Syria as a key strategic ally in the region and decided to support the Assad regime. Thousands of military advisors, volunteer fighters, and affiliated forces were deployed to help the Syrian government fight against rebel forces. The Quds Force, a special unit of Iran's Revolutionary Guard, played a crucial role in organizing and coordinating these operations. Iran's involvement contributed significantly to keeping the Assad regime intact during the war's most difficult years. Tehran also established numerous economic and military agreements with Damascus, thereby strengthening its position in Syria's post-war power structure. For Iran, maintaining a friendly government in Syria held not only political significance, but also created a strategic corridor connecting Tehran to other allies in the region. However, this deep involvement also made Iran a target of criticism from many other countries, which argued that Tehran's military presence had helped prolong the conflict. Lebanon is another location where Iran's influence has grown strongly over many decades. The relationship between Iran and Lebanon is mainly tied to Hezbollah, a political and military organization rooted in Lebanon's Shia Muslim community. After the 1979 revolution, Iran began supporting Hezbollah through training, funding, and weapons. Over time, Hezbollah developed into one of Lebanon's most important political and military forces, while becoming a key part of Iran's regional strategy. This cooperation allowed Iran to exert significant influence in Lebanese politics and create a strategic counterweight to Israel along its northern border. Hezbollah has not only participated in Lebanon's internal politics, but has also played a role in regional conflicts, including the war in Syria. However, the organization's presence and influence have also sparked considerable controversy within Lebanon and on the international stage. Some governments view Hezbollah as a legitimate resistance force, while others consider it an armed group destabilizing the region. Beyond Syria and Lebanon, Yemen has also become an important part of Iran's geopolitical picture. In that country, the Houthi movement, an armed group originating from the Shia community in northern Yemen, has emerged as a significant political and military force in the long-running civil war. Numerous international reports indicate that Iran has provided military and financial support to the movement, including weapons, training, and strategic assistance. That support has helped the Houthis enhance their military capabilities, including the use of missiles and drones in conflicts with the Saudi-led coalition forces. For Iran, Yemen holds strategic importance due to its location near the vital Bab al-Mandab Strait, one of the world's key energy shipping routes. However, Iran's involvement in Yemen has also been one of the reasons tensions between Tehran and the Gulf states have increased over many years. Iran's activities in Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen are often linked to a broader strategy that many analysts call the Axis of Resistance. This is a network of forces and organizations affiliated with Iran across the Middle East, including various armed and political groups operating in different countries. This network is seen as a way for Iran to expand regional influence without needing to deploy large-scale conventional troops everywhere. This strategy allows Iran to create a flexible alliance system in the region. Through political relationships, military support, and economic cooperation, Tehran can maintain influence in many regional conflicts and crises. At the same time, this network also creates a strategic defensive layer, helping Iran counter stronger military adversaries. However, Iran's expanding influence has also heightened tensions with many other countries in the region and around the world. Some nations view Tehran's activities as part of a strategy to expand geopolitical power, while Iran often describes these actions as efforts to protect allies and resist external interference. This difference in perspectives has made many regional conflicts even more complex. Regardless of how it is viewed, Iran's influence in the Middle East in recent decades is difficult to deny. From Damascus to Beirut, from Baghdad to Sana'a, Tehran's political and military network of relationships has created a vast sphere of influence far beyond its national borders. In that process, Ali Khamenei, in his role as supreme leader, remains the one directing the country's long-term strategy. After many decades under his leadership, Iran is no longer just a country in the region, but has become a major geopolitical actor. Decisions made in Tehran can affect many conflicts and power balances throughout the Middle East, and it is within that complex picture that the shadow of Iran and of the leader at its head continues to stretch across the entire region. After many decades holding Iran's highest position of power, the story of Ali Khamenei has become an inseparable part of this country's modern history. From the early days of the revolution to political crises and regional conflicts, he has always been at the center of the power system. But the journey that brought him to that position did not begin with power or privilege. It began with a simple life in a clerical family in Mashhad, where values of religion, discipline, and patience were taught from a very early age. When looking back over his entire life, three major phases can be clearly seen that shaped Ali Khamenei's path. The first phase was the period of a young cleric searching for his role in Iranian society. The years of study in Mashhad and Qom helped him encounter the religious and political ideas forming among the clerical community. It was during that time that he met Ayatollah Khomeini, the teacher and the greatest influence on his thought. Khomeini's lectures and views on the role of religion in politics formed the foundation for how Khamenei came to view society and power. The second phase of his life was the period of a revolutionary activist. In the 1960s and 1970s, Iran was undergoing profound political upheavals under the Shah's regime. Khamenei joined opposition networks, taught revolutionary ideas, and was arrested multiple times by the regime's security forces. The months in SAVAK prisons did not make him abandon his path. On the contrary, they reinforced his belief that Iran's political system needed to change. When the 1979 revolution erupted and the monarchy collapsed, Khamenei became one of the faces of the revolutionary clerical generation. The third phase began when he entered the power structure of the new state. After the failed assassination attempt in 1981, he became president of Iran amid a country mired in a prolonged war with Iraq. The years of wartime leadership helped him accumulate political experience and build important relationships within the state apparatus. When Ayatollah Khomeini passed away in 1989, Iran faced a pivotal moment. The decision to choose Ali Khamenei as supreme leader at that time was seen as an unexpected choice, but it opened the longest chapter in his career. In the years that followed, Khamenei gradually built a power structure around the position of supreme leader. Through organizations such as the Revolutionary Guard, the clerical system, and political oversight bodies, he consolidated his role within the state apparatus. At the same time, Iran continued to face numerous external challenges, especially prolonged tensions with the United States and crises in the Middle East. Issues such as the nuclear program, economic sanctions, and regional conflicts became a permanent part of Iranian politics for many decades. Domestically, Iranian society also underwent many major changes. Protests, debates about political reform, and generational differences in views reflected the diversity in modern Iranian society. In that context, the role of supreme leader remained central to the political system. With a tenure spanning multiple presidents, Ali Khamenei became one of the longest ruling leaders in the country's modern history. His image has therefore often been viewed in many different ways. For his supporters, he is the defender of the principles of the Islamic Republic and the leader who kept the country stable in a turbulent region. They argue that he helped Iran maintain independence in the face of international pressure and built significant regional influence. But for his critics, the power system he leads remains highly controversial, especially on issues related to domestic politics and international relations. Regardless of the perspective, it cannot be denied that Ali Khamenei played a crucial role in shaping modern Iran. From a young cleric once imprisoned for political activities, he became the supreme leader of a nation with major influence in the Middle East. That journey included many events: revolution, war, assassination attempt, economic crises, and profound changes in the international order. The story of Ali Khamenei is therefore not just a story of one individual. It also reflects Iran's journey through the second half of the 20th century and the early decades of the 21st century, a nation always standing at the intersection of religion, politics, and global geopolitics. From the simple streets of Mashhad to the highest position of power in the Islamic Republic, his path is proof of how historical events can shape the life of one person and the destiny of an entire nation. For more than 3 decades, Ali Khamenei has stood at the center of Iran's power, a quiet figure shaping the destiny of a nation. The story of Ali Khamenei shows how a person can be shaped by historical circumstances and the major events of the era. From a boy raised in a poor clerical family in Mashhad, he entered the path of theology, was arrested multiple times under the Shah's regime, then became a figure in the 1979 revolution. Experiences such as time in SAVAK prisons, the 1981 bomb assassination attempt that left his right arm paralyzed, or the years leading Iran through the 8-year Iran-Iraq war, shaped a leader matured in crisis. For the American people, this story offers some practical lessons. First, history shows that leaders are often shaped by major societal events. The years of war and revolution strongly influenced how Khamenei views power, security, and national independence. This reminds us that to understand another country's policy, we need to understand the historical context and the experiences of that nation's leaders. Second, the story also highlights the importance of political institutions. When Khamenei became supreme leader in 1989, he did not rely solely on himself, but built a power system through organizations such as the Revolutionary Guard and the Guardian Council. This reflects how institutions can shape long-term politics. For American society, where democratic institutions like Congress, the courts, and elections form the foundation, the lesson is that maintaining transparency and checks and balances is crucial to protecting the political system. Finally, the story also shows the complexity of international politics. The tensions between Iran and the United States, from the nuclear issue to regional conflicts, often stem from different views on security and national interests. This underscores that in today's world, understanding the history and perspectives of other nations can help build dialogue and avoid dangerous misunderstandings. If you find the story of the journey from a poor cleric in Mashhad to the center of power in Iran truly thought-provoking, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next captivating history and politics documentaries. Thank you for following Ali Khamenei's journey to the end, and see you in the next video with another story about the figures who have shaped the modern world.